Welcome to Belmont Poetry Night. I'm Monica Korde, your host and the Poet Laureate of Belmont, California. As an exception to the usual, we are meeting on the fourth Tuesday today, but typically we meet on the third Tuesdays of every month to celebrate the spoken word as makers, listeners, and admirers of poetry. We come with featured guests and an open mic, inviting readers of all ages. After gathering for several years at our favorite physical venue, the Belmont Library, since the pandemic, our thriving poetry circle has transitioned to this virtual space, and I am grateful this allows me to welcome poets and listeners from across the globe. Happy October, everyone. I'm in my happy place now that I find myself in your company. And going with our poetry night tradition, please share in the chat where you are joining me from. As always, it's great to see you all, even those who aren't on video yet. Thanks for joining me and zooming in. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche says, "The essence of all beautiful art, all great art, is gratitude." So true, isn't it? October comes with all its autumn calmness, but there are so many inspiring occasions, so many things going on that I feel grateful for. For one, since it is recognized and celebrated as the National Arts and Humanities Month, artists from all genres are being honored and celebrated now. And an artist in poetry that I'd like to honor and remember tonight is my favorite poet and essayist, Louise Gluck, who passed away this month. As the season of autumn reminds us of a certain kind of passing too. Here's one of her poems, I feel, which honors her passing and it eternizes her poetic voice. The poem is titled Crossroads. My body, now that we will not be traveling together much longer, I begin to feel a new tenderness toward you, very raw and unfamiliar, like what I remember of love when I was young. Love that was so often foolish in its objectives, but never in its choices, its intensities. Too much demanded in advance, too much that could not be promised. My soul has been so fearful, so violent. Forgive its brutality. As though it were that soul, my hand moves over you cautiously, not wishing to give offense, but eager, finally, to achieve expression as substance. It is not the earth I will miss. It is you I will miss. Thank you. This poem is so clearly a dialogue, a direct conversation between the poet and her raw physical self. And that is what much of Gluck's poetry was known for the unblinking candor, sharp directness, and a searing sensitivity with which she wrote of human experiences. And I'm grateful for this genius artist, this Nobel laureate, and her unparalleled work in poetry. And I'm also filled with much gratitude for having not just one or two special guests, but three of our very own brilliant poets as my featured artists tonight. Mirna Hirschl, Robert Rubino, and Lois Fried. I've been so looking forward to this. Any serious art requires prodigious commitment, and as we recognize the National Arts and Humanities Month, my intention in curating tonight's poetry spotlight was to recognize this commitment to art, poetry in this case, and honor these beloved trio of poets who've been not only regular open mic readers at the Belmont Poetry Night for years, for several other poetry venues as well, but each of whom have been working constantly at defining their path of poetry. And I'm so thrilled to host all of them as they share their poems from their debut poetry collections. For this special poetry spotlight, I'll make a slight change to our usual flow and have our trio of co-features read first and then follow it up with a roundtable conversation. I'll begin with you, Mirna, followed by Robert and then Lois. So without further ado, let me introduce my first featured poet. Mirna Hirschl grew up in Zagreb, Croatia, which was at the time Yugoslavia under Tito's communist regime. She studied architecture at the University of Zagreb, where she developed a love of the arts, which became one of the major interests in her life. She immigrated to the US in 1962, settled in New York State, and earned her BS and MS in computer science from SUNY at Binghamton. She has been a Belmont resident for the last 18 years and is a member of local poetry circles, literature and foreign language clubs. That's where I met Mirna as well, in both poetry circles as well as foreign language clubs. She started writing poetry very late in life. And in early 2023, this year, she published her debut collection of poems, How Memories Insist. Welcome, Mirna.
Thank you, Monica. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's indeed an honor to share the spot with Lois and Robert. We are familiar with each other's poetry, and this makes it even more special. So, as you said, without further ado, I will start reading the first poem. This poem has become, it was featured on, the photograph of it was featured on my first collection of poems. I don't know if there is something wrong, but I've lost you, Monica. Is that okay? Okay, spotlight is only on me, is that it?
Yes, Mirna, you're on the spotlight, but we can all see you and hear you.
I guess I'm not used to it. This first poem is called The Mimosa on Avon Street. It's about a beautiful, beautiful mimosa tree, indeed, on Avon Street in our beautiful Belmont, which I see on my daily walks. And the photograph of it appears on the cover of my book. It's in the form of pantoum, which means that every second line in a stanza becomes the first line in the following stanza to emphasize the content. So, The Mimosa on Avon Street. 100 eyes bore through my back. Gaping knobs are staring at me from the trunk of a mimosa tree. Bare, but for few precocious buds that sparsely dot the nuded skin. The gaping knobs are staring at me through the scars implanted in the bark that marked a special kind of loss, perhaps of some aborted twigs or an axe's mutilation of the limbs. With the scars implanted in the bark, the tree imposed on me its sadness. It resembled nature's rendering of a Magritte painting, but more sinister, alive, and darkly insistent. The tree imposed on me its sadness. I tried to recall its previous splendor, but couldn't. The nagging impression, having left my eyes, has already settled deeper. Again, fervently, I try to recall its previous splendor, hoping the tree will bloom again, despite its wounds, and the golden clusters of velvety tufts will be oblivious to pain that bore them. I hope the tree will bloom again and bask rejuvenated in the sun. Come, walk with me down Avon Street. Together, we will soon forget the wounds and celebrate the coming of the spring. So, thank you. At this point, to read the second poem, I will have to change a tune a bit and read something that is more in tune of what is going on nowadays. A glimmer of hope in night. A glimmer of hope in a nightmare. In this pitch black night, I suffocate in the hold of a loud, threatening cloud of lawyers' gowns, swishing in arguments, and politicians plotting and scheming. Heavy hand of time presses on my shoulder. Storm is gathering. The simple folk despairing. Stop squabbling, you rulers rich, mighty, and crafty. Heed the seething mob below. Can you not foresee an avalanche of anger rising out of those numberless, nameless shoulders? Shudder, cushioned lives. Rewrite yourselves, you books of right and wrong. This ferment doesn't know of rules. Fear, you are justified to fill the hearts, make them race like rabbits. The horses will undomesticate themselves, the bison stampede over desiccated earth, and let no child's cradle be in their way, for accidents know not of guilt. Oh, Eisenstein, we need you now to record the silent screams before they're audible. Our nostrils stand obtuse by good life, can't smell anything. Not the spreading fires, not even the stench of dead sea lions washed ashore on the petroleum-spilled, black-tarred beaches. Numbed, numb, how can we detect an odorless annihilation threat? It is almost morning. The light is seeping sheepishly into my room. Shaken by a nightmare. Is that what it was? I dread to hear news, listen to bewildered grown-ups already resigned or about to resign. This time, it will take the youth to lift the world out of its demise. I will look for answers in my grandchildren's faces. How I long to see the sparks of elan in their clear, scintillating eyes, a determination settle in the stubborn jawlines. I will listen to their naive but sincere political arguments, watch the future brighten in youthful expression. I think they will ripen well. In them only do I see the light. Thank you. And I will close with a brief poem of somewhat lighter character. Nasturtium dreams. In reality, we are together. In dreams, each in one's own. Yet in the budding light of this morning, I remember having dreamt of us treading the same path in parallel steps. And the path was merry with nasturtiums and the air scented with honeysuckle. You sleep so peacefully next to me. If I wake you up now, would you remember us being together in my dream? Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Simply stunning, Mirna. Thank you so much for sharing all of those beautiful pieces. Um, I'll encourage our audience to unmute for a quick sec. So we hear the applause, and we may not have time for questions from you, but please share any appreciative comments or words of praise you have for Mirna. Go right ahead.
Beautiful, beautiful reading, Mirna.
Very much.
Beautiful.
Mhm.
Fantastic imagery.
Yes, I would agree.
Thank you so much for sharing. So much.
I agree, Mirna. I share your faith in the youth of today. I see so much promise in them and so much early wisdom and so much energy. I also have a mimosa tree, so I really loved your poem.
Thank you.
Really insightful, Mirna. Enjoyed your poems a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You're very kind.
Very moving, Mirna, and quite a blend of intellect and emotion. Just beautifully done.
Thank you, Robert.
I especially enjoyed the last one.
Thank you so much, everyone. I love all the love that comes through in the chat as well as through your kind praise here for our beloved Mirna. I'm really happy to hear her as well. And Mirna, I love how in your poems you travel from pitch black to light, to hope and dreams, which seem to surface in all of these poems you just read. And I'll say your poems are true pearls of wisdom. And I'd just like to go back to some of the lines that stayed with me from one of your pieces that you just read, and I'll quote from that poem. This time, it will take the youth to lift the world out of its demise. I will look for answers in my grandchildren's faces. How I long to see the sparks of elan in their clear, scintillating eyes. I'd like everyone to take these lines home with you. It's a beautiful thought as well, Mirna. Thank you so much for sharing tonight. I will come back to you very, very soon. And let's move on to our next featured poet.
Thank you.
Robert Eugene Rubino was a copy editor for nearly 30 years at the Press Democrat in Santa Rosa, California, when it was a New York Times regional newspaper. And for more than 20 years, he contributed weekly sports columns. Since retiring in 2013, he has published prose and poetry in various online and print literary journals, including Hippocampus, NUNUM, The Right Launch, Raw Art Review, and Haunted Waters Press. In 2022, hear this, everyone, he published 3 collections: Aficionado from Hummingbird Press, Vanity Unfair, Cathexis Northwest Press, and Douglas Knocks Out Tyson from Uncollected Press. What an accomplishment. Congratulations on that. He lives with his wife, Terry, in Palo Alto. Welcome, Robert. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Monica. And such a pleasure to share this with Mirna and Lois, whose work I'm very familiar with for the past several years. I'm going to read some pieces from my very first book, Aficionado. The subtitle is Poetry and Prose Inspired by Cinema, Sports, and Jazz. This just happens to be my 3 loves. I'll leave it to the listeners to figure out which poem goes to which category. This first piece is called Bernadette at Lourdes. With no teacher aides, no volunteer parents, just one young nun. So young she could have been your actual sister. Sister Mary Rose marches you and her other 71 second grade students 11 blocks west toward the 59th Street Bridge to the shabby palatial Hobart Theater for your first movie in a movie theater experience, The Song of Bernadette, which, go figure, featured no song and in 1955 already had been around for 12 years. But to us 7-year-olds, it's as fresh as our unsoiled souls, as fantastical as a 19th century French peasant girl's heavenly visions of a virgin mother, as miraculous as curative spring waters sprung from the dirt of the local dump, as mysterious as falling in pure platonic love for the first time with 24-year-old Jennifer Jones as the 14-year-old Bernadette. And in love, too, with what you would articulate decades later as the subtext. And what a seductive subtext it is. That there's lonely but lovely, long-suffering specialness in seeing something no one else sees, whether in the wicked wide world or deep within oneself. This next piece is called Stickball Hallucinations, 1958. Silent, narrow summer streets, parked car crowded under Idlewild's cacophonous steel gray skies, become wide open, sunny clear, cheer splashed spaces in old Yankee Stadium, a borough away in the Bronx. Sawed-off skinny broomstick in bony hands becomes big-barreled Louisville slugger in meaty fists, as scrawny day-tripping 10-year-old Zero U becomes number 7 Mickey Mantle, Superman in pinstripes. Pink Spalding rubber ball savagely, innocently struck dead solid perfect becomes a big league red-stitched white horsehide hardball, soaring, streaking like a comet's tail toward the upper deck facade with its bleached lime green frieze of cream scalloped crowns. Art Tatum at the Onyx Club. It's a miracle if you think about it. A poet's inner inspiration, inspiration like a flow, flow like a rhythm, rhythm like a muse, muse like mosaics of music, classical, new age, old spirituals, folk, pop, rock, rap, funk, punk, Renaissance, rockabilly, bluegrass, blues, but mostly jazz stride under the right circumstances, when everything is just so, when all the tick-tocks and click-clocks of creation align benignly, a poet at work can feel like Art Tatum at the Onyx Club, where you were meant to be, doing what you were meant to do, an instrument of your own mysterious spirit. This is a short version of a longer piece that's in Aficionado. Smoking the dope of horoscope. You smoked the dope of horoscope, got the same January birthday as Lee Van Cleef, a B-list character actor who played the bad to Clint Eastwood's Good and Eli Wallach's Ugly in Sergio Leone's classic spaghetti western. Well, confess, you like being linked with the bad. You're simpatico with the bad, as long as it's B-list bad, pretend bad. And I'm going to close with, it's also in the book, but it's also somewhat appropriate for upcoming Halloween. It's called They Get You When You Sleep. When you were 10, you and two pals paid 35 cents each to see Invasion of the Body Snatchers at the Seat Creaking Colony Theater on a slushy Saturday in October. More than 60 years later, you've seen that original and 3 remarkable remakes many, many times. All of them getting in your head, under your skin, all of them still spooky, all of them still sparking angst, all of them so eerily elemental, so soul core captivating, stirring sleepy suspicions of those you know, those you love. Although they appear the same as always, they may not be who you think they are, who they say they are. Your own mother might not really be your mother. Sleepy suspicions, they just aren't themselves. The most recent remake making the paranoid point that anyone, everyone, anywhere, everywhere just might be soul-sucking, non-human, bland as peas in a pod people, and that might be for the best, the common good. Scariest of all is you. You might not be your own true self. You might not really be who you think you are, who you say you are. You might not really be you. Thank you so much for listening.
All right, let's unmute. Love to hear some audience praise and love for Robert.
The only one.
Robert, I want that Halloween poem. Send it to me.
Robert, do we need to clear the pods out of our backyard that are growing like weeds? We don't know what they are. They're very large.
Yeah, you better deal with them very quickly.
Okay. I had a feeling you were going to say that.
I can't get over smoking the dope of horoscope. I just love that jingle. It's ingenious.
Don't you? Me too. Me too. I'm with you, David.
Yes, like
Yeah.
with pretend bad.
I would just like to say that you really took me to some new scenery here. Your alliterations and rhythms and choice of words, the way you concatenate them, they're so refreshing, vivid. And then you switched with the last poem. All of a sudden, you went into some depth, like, you may not be who you are. Okay, so it was very interesting, really great, delightful.
Thank you, Mirna.
Robert, you have such a gift for titles, almost as if you were a journalist. I love that. But what really struck me is that you really raised nostalgia for me. Early movies, the Body Snatchers when you were a kid, the sports, the dreams and imagination of playing sports when you were a kid. But it's not nostalgia laced with like that gauze. It was just like you're there, you're a kid again. It's like the energy's all there. It's just amazing. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I loved being taken into your world. And my late husband, who was born and raised in Brooklyn, always spoke about stickball. So I really love that piece and bringing us into the world, and you're hoping to be Mickey Mantle with your stickball. That's just a great piece. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Louise.
Yes, anyone who says Spalding is my soul brother. And your 3 categories, I think we can figure out which was which, but I love to see you sew them all together into one piece.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say love hearing some of my favorites, have all books. So it's fun to hear them read. It always is. And you know, I'm always aware, Robert, of your amazing skill with alliteration and language. But tonight's the first night I really focused on the internal rhymes. And especially in the jazz poem, it really created music. So that was wonderful. Now I will look for that.
Thank you, Sandy.
I really love the rhythm in the jazz poem and the cataloging. I just wanted it to keep going and going. You know, it ended too soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's always sweet to hear that it ended too soon. I think that's a wonderful praise for any reader or any poet. And you are such a wordsmith, Robert. The musicality that your language holds, and it isn't surprising considering your line of work, which involved writing journalistic essays and columns, as we know. But it's amazing how you transfer this style to your poetic voice, which was very point of view and playfully ironic and even fast paced. I'll just reflect back on some of the lines which I loved from one of your pieces. I think it is a crowd favorite as well. It was from the Stickball Hallucinations, I believe. And the lines are: silent, narrow summer streets, parked car crowded under idle whiles, cacophonous, steel gray skies, became wide open, sunny, clear, cheer-splashed spaces in old Yankee Stadium, a borough away in the Bronx. I'm sure it brings many memories to a lot of people and makes them nostalgic. And it's always wonderful to hear that scene or landscape that you bring to life, Robert. Thank you so much for reading tonight.
Thank you so much, Monica. Appreciate it.
I will circle back to you again, but not before we hear our final and third featured reader for tonight. Lois Fried is a member of the California Poetry Society and a regular open mic reader of the Belmont Poetry Night series and Poets Night series. She has been actively involved in the poetry community for years and has served as a judge for youth poetry contests held in San Mateo County. A talented leader, manager, speaker, and trainer who has shared her work before large audiences at national conferences, including a podcast for the American Payroll Association. She has always found time to write poetry. So Great the Journey is her debut book of poems that was released early this year. She lives with her family on the peninsula in San Mateo County. Fantastic to have you, Lois. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Monica. And I too am just so pleased to share the evening with Mirna and Robert. We have been together for a number of years, and I never ever tire of hearing the beautiful words and poems and memories coming from these two wonderful poets. So love being with you tonight. And thank you, Monica, for putting this beautiful trio together. Thank you. I'm going to start with a poem that takes me back to my youth. So I will share three different types of poems. A poem about my youth, of course, love, with the title of my book being So Great the Journey, that was launched this year in April of this year. And the subline going with that is love is all there is to give freely. So I'll share about my youth, a poem about love, and my second love, which is nature. The poems about all of the beauty around us. There will be a couple of poems about that. Starting out with baking bread. My mother was a wonderful cook and baker, and this poem always takes me back to my childhood. Baking bread. There is peace and tranquility in baking bread. From assembling the simple ingredients on the countertop to pulling the mixing bowls and baking pans from the cabinet below. I clear my head to make space to be renewed, rejuvenated, and swept away to a time when mother baked bread that smelled like love, warm hearts, and soft hands. Tranquility comes when leavened bread, flour is mixed with yeast cells, bringing about a peaceful, aromatic, and comforting feeling, a boost, an uplift, a kinder me. It doesn't matter what type of bread I'm baking, whole grain, sourdough, challah, rye, or yeast. It conjures up powerful childhood memories, therapeutic years, and rainy Sunday afternoons. Thank you. And my next piece will be a poem about love. It's a short poem about love, but it has such a background for me. It started with my little boy who was in the second grade, and I dropped him off one morning at school, and it was raining, a pouring raining morning. And as he got out of the car, he spotted one of his friends, another little second grader, standing right outside the gate of the school, crying his eyes out, waving to his dad as he drove away. And our boy walked over there and just put his arms around his little friend, let up his umbrella, and stood there with him until the little boy couldn't see his father anymore. So I rushed to work, and I couldn't wait to jot down some notes about that wonderful, beautiful observation that I made. And I call this poem Learning Love. Raindrops forming on dry surfaces, creating petrichor from street dirt and concrete, showering windshields, escaping the whoosh of the wipers, kissing the rose petals and ignoring the thorns. Constant downpour weighing down a heavy heart, washing away the sadness but not the hurt. The goddess of rain appears under a halo big enough for two. Learning love, learning healing, learning love. Thank you. And the next poem will take us to nature, and because of the beauty of the fall season, I'll start out with autumn awesomeness. The brown, orange, and yellow leaves nestled together to protect each other from the ground below, to be swept, crushed, and blown in a heap for the garden next spring. The trimmings from the maple, oak, and weeping willow mingle in with freshly cut shrubs and grass, dripping tiny droplets of early morning dew onto the manicured lawn. Will there be something left from the humid days of summer when the hummingbird sang and the red robin whistled? It all seems like a familiar day, yet different. Autumn has arrived. Thank you. And I will wrap up my session with seasons of love. And what I hope you hear as I take you through seasons of love, or you're feeling each and every season with me. Seasons of love. Cold, harsh winter storms. Icicles dripping from a hint of sun. Lovers cuddling by the fire, bringing only warmth and passion to last throughout the onset of spring. Birds chirping, cherry blossoms sprouting, families taking long walks before the April showers come. catching rainwater for its sweetness in a recycled metal drum. Lazy, scorching summer days fold into cool, dark autumn nights. Cold, harsh winter storms, icicles dripping from a hint of sun. Seasons of love worth repeating again next year. Thank you. Thank you very much. And Monica, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Lois, for offering us such a wide range of your poetry. And I'm so glad they're all a part of your book now. I'll request the audience to please unmute themselves and share their thoughts with Lois. Please go ahead.
Lois, I have to say, I'm still just blown away by the first, I think it was your first poem about your son offering comfort to his crying friend. That to capture something so simple with such deep feeling and meaning was remarkable, and you did it so beautifully. It wasn't sentimental. It was just beautiful. I really admire that.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you.
I like the way you read your stuff, because you're always just so, smiling, and it's like you enjoy reading it probably just as much as you enjoy writing it.
Thank you.
I felt like I was wrapped in the tenderness of your love. Just beautiful.
Thank you very much.
Lois, all your poems really are, all of them are really about love and the interconnectedness of nature and ourselves. And you reminded us how much children have to reteach us about love. They haven't closed off their hearts really to anyone yet, if they're lucky. And also all I can smell now is fresh bread. So
thank you.
I want to build on that idea. Excuse me for 1 second.
Yeah, my husband bakes bread regularly, and now when I smell the bread, I won't think of it the same. I'm going to realize that I'm smelling love. So,
oh, thank you.
It's wonderful. Just wonderful. Thank you.
Lois, no question that nature and love poems automatically take you to another dimension, especially needed in these days, and usually contributed to that. Thank you so much. I truly loved those poems.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Lois, having heard your poems all these years, it's no surprise. But everything that everybody else said and more, what I admire the most is the simplicity, in the best sense of the word, that produces so much feeling and warmth. That just blows me away.
Oh, thank you, Mirna. Thank you.
Lois, my turn. Your voice is very calming. It always has been. Just the way you speak, and you do look so happy when you're speaking it, but it's just the way you speak. It's the way you articulate your words, the tone of your voice. It's just awesome. That's why I said Lois awesomeness. And that's just what I want to say.
Thank you, Deborah.
Yes, that's what I was thinking also. You take us through all the seasons of love, and you take us through it with your own person that embodies love.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was about to say too, darling, there's just a tremendous amount of hope that's in all of your poems. I mean, and just even learning love is a great follow-on to what Mirna said about grandchildren, and being able to see the hope of the future and the love in the simplicity of our son. So very, very special at a time like this, and really all times.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Daryl.
David, did you want to say something as well? If you'd like to.
Yeah, I apologize. We
Go
had
ahead.
the intercom announcement go off like right when I
No
wanted to
worries.
chat. I just wanted to say, I think the connection when it came to your poem baking bread, the connection to smells and the practice of cooking, how that resonates with so many of us as we can recall times with our grandparents or parents or loved ones throughout the years. It was just really powerful, and I was so glad that you started with that poem because it really hit a note with me. So I want to thank you for sharing that wonderful poem. Kudos to you on that one.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Thanks to everyone for your kind words.
Well, there is so much depth in your writing, Lois, and it is admirable the way you capture the essence of a season or a snapshot from your observations. I especially love the imagery your poetry invokes, and I think echoing back to the thoughts that Louise shared with us, it almost feels as if one were to hold your poem close, it'll take you in an embrace. So thank you so much for sharing your words, and I'd love to quote some lines from one of your poems, which have always stayed with me, and I really enjoy reading them loud to myself often. Constant downpour weighing down a heavy heart, washing away the sadness, but not the hurt. The goddess of rain appears under a halo big enough for two. Learning love, learning healing, learning love. Thank you. Joy Harjo, about discovering poetry as a calling, said that we all have gifts that are almost folded up, and they are placed in between the heart and where your spirit lives, and then they unfold at different times, and they need a way out. And all three of you, my amazing features tonight, have this gift of making poetry, and I'm so glad you responded to that call. Let us dive right into our conversation now. And my first question to all of you is, I was reading an interview with poet Lee Young Lee, and he mentioned that he published his first poetry collection almost by accident in about 1986, his first poetry collection. If you could give us a little glimpse, what is your first poetry book story like? And how has the process of creating your book or books, in your case, Robert, been its own form of discovery? And Mirna, maybe you can go ahead, and respond to that.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Well, having this first book of poetry published was sort of a surprise to me, bigger than to anyone else, it seems. When I started writing poetry, I wrote it for myself. I didn't even know that there were poetry clubs, and kept at it for several years. Once I discovered that I can share it with others, this was the first step. It broke the silence. Then, all of a sudden, for me, it became almost urgent to publish it. I can't really explain it. All these years of solitary work and everything was fine. And then all of a sudden, I just had to write it. It is an inner growth, no doubt about it. For me personally, I have learned more about myself through my own poems than I did through all those numerous years before I started writing poetry. It is amazing. I discovered things that I truly didn't know, and some poems came to me as such a total surprise that I almost thought, did somebody else write this? I mean, I'm not sure these are my feelings. But then I thought about it a little deeper, and yes, of course, it just seems that poems perhaps are bolder and more true than the person themselves. So yeah, and an amazing thing, once you start, you can't stop. It's just, you know, it's like an addiction. Isn't it for you too?
Absolutely. Yes, I have to say, Mirna, I feel the same way. I've been writing poetry for many, many years. I started in my teen years and just never did anything with any of my work, just kept the little pieces of papers and notebooks and all of those things. And at some point, about 5 years ago, I decided it was time to put it all together and see it in one place. So I started to just type it into a Word doc, and it became a manuscript. And I was just shocked at the volume of work that I had over the many, many years. And it just morphed into this book. And I just like to just share just how I came up with the title, just for fun. Yeah. I had a page in my notebook. I always have a notebook of poetry that I'm writing, where I'm keeping notes and words and phrases and that kind of thing. And I had one page dedicated to, one of these days, maybe I'll write a book. So I kept coming up with titles. This page probably had 35 titles on it. And none of those titles made it. The title made it. I thought of it at 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up, my eyes popped open, and I said, so great, the journey. I got up, I wrote it down, popped back in bed, went right back to sleep. But I never had a doubt that I was going to move forward with that title. And the subtitle or the subline that's there actually came from one of my poems, and it needed to be there because then I felt like I really put it all together when I pull that line out that says, love is all there is to give freely. So someone said, and I really appreciate you observing that and seeing that in my poetry, that love is kind of intertwined in all of my poems, even the ones that are grieving poems. And I have some in the book that are filled with grief, but from those, I still fused in some love with that, because I always feel there's an intersection between grief and love. And hopefully that'll come through in some of the other poems that you might read and you might hear later on. Thank you.
Talking about titles, Robert, why don't you start with that as well? Your books have great titles as well.
Well, aficionado was a word I remember reading 50, 60 years ago, often in Hemingway stories. And I just like the sound of it. I also like the meaning of it, that, you're kind of I want to say expert, but not quite an expert. You're a devotee of certain things, and like I said, in my case, ever since I was a little kid, I liked reading. I love movies. I love sports, and from early teenage years, I loved jazz. So I thought that was a good title. I could definitely just by the way, relate to what both Mirna and Lois said, but especially Mirna said, I often got the feeling and still get the feeling every day when I write, like, where is this coming from? And often I will look back on things I've written and just vaguely remember writing it. So I'm not much for mysticism or anything like that, but it's hard to explain where it comes from. But I'm glad it's there, and it's definitely an addiction. The title of my other book, Vanity Unfair, is actually the title of an early poem that I published, and it's kind of a sardonic piece about how we often get wrapped up in our own vanities and egos, and how ridiculous that is in the long run. And the title of my third book is, I guess you'd have to be a certain kind of sports fan to get it, but Douglas Knocks Out Tyson. It's like, it represents like the one of the biggest upsets in sports history. So it always struck me that, as far as the title for a poem that could possibly be accessible to other people, it simply means anything's possible. The underdog, whether it's yourself or somebody else, can still triumph. The only thing I will say real quickly, I don't want to take up too much more time, is that the publication of 3 books in 1 year was total accident, in that 2 of the manuscripts were sent out years prior to my getting accepted, and I just assumed they had been rejected, and went on with self-publishing with my friend Tony Eldorado, Aficionado. And just as we were completing that, totally out of the blue, I got the acceptances from the other 2 publishers, one of whom sat on it for almost 2 years, and the other for over a year. And I had just given up on that. So it just happened that way.
Wow, those are really brilliant stories to hear, and the journeys that each of you have so uniquely discovered while creating those books. And poetry writing as a practice for one can be very personal, cathartic, meditative even, and yet we see the power it embodies when it is shared. So unlike other genres in writing, such as essays, novels, memoirs, poetry is inherently social, I feel, oratory in nature, with a certain kind of lightness in its being, no matter how intense it is. And each of you have been such dedicated open mic readers, gathering at community poetry circles to read your work aloud, to listen to others read. And as I say that, I feel so grateful to be a part of this beautiful community of poets who are truly the heart and soul of these poetry nights. After being a part of public readings for several years, tell me, does performing a poem influence what you write? And what is your takeaway from having a connection with a live audience each time you read at open mics?
I will say that 5 years ago, if somebody told me I would be reading anything in public, I would have said that they were crazy. I just never imagined myself doing it. I'm not really a public person and never considered myself a public speaker. A friend with whom I took a poetry class through Stanford Continuing Education told me about Dan Brady's Sacred Grounds open mic every Wednesday, and this was before the pandemic. So I went up to the city and I fell in love with the atmosphere, with all the other poets. Dan has been unfailingly supportive. So talk about an addiction. After that, I just had to do that as often as possible.
That's great. Dan, I'm sure, is in the audience today, so he's listening. And it's always great to have some or the other connection, which just gets us into this. And I can't believe, Robert, it is so recent for you. You say 5 years back. That's really amazing. I've been listening to Mirna and Lois on open mics for years now, and it's so that makes me so familiar with their work. Yet it's amazing to see the growth of these poets. Mirna, what would you have to say about this, your experience on the open mics?
Well, mostly what Robert already said. It's amazing. I always thought of myself way more shy than I really am, obviously. Like you said, if anybody told me I'll just not only read my own poetry, but even more, discuss it with sometimes total strangers, I would say, well, dream on. I would never do it. There is just not a chance. But I have to say, maybe it's also support of other people who were there already before me and experienced poets. As soon as I figured out immediately that really, we are just sharing our emotions. That's fine. We are people, we are humans. We do have very similar emotions deep down in the end. We are talking about love. We are talking about changing of the seasons. We are talking about our anxiety over whatever it may be that's ailing all of us right now. There is really nothing that unusual. I don't even, now when I think back, I don't even know what the squeamishness was about anyway. So as soon as I grew into it, I love it. I have to say, I truly enjoy declaiming. I love to read in public. It's wonderful. I also want to add something else. And this is really when you know you are addicted, but good, you are hooked. 5 years ago, until 5 years ago, we used to travel a great deal, my husband and I. And before that, whenever we went for a lovely trip, we would come back, discuss it, watch the photos. It was wonderful. Until one nice day, I discovered that I'm so getting antsy after every trip. In certain ways, so dissatisfied, even nervous, like what is missing? How can anything even be missing when you have spent, say, a month in Europe having extraordinary experiences and everything? Until I discovered that what was missing is writing and reading poetry. Would you believe? I couldn't settle down until I resumed and reassured myself, no, you haven't lost it. It was just a pause. You are too busy. Everything is fine. But it was almost an anxiety, like, what if I have lost it? What if I have nothing more to say? Luckily, that hasn't happened. I can't even imagine. I guess that's how drunk feels if they're not getting their fix. I don't know. It's really important. What would you say, Lois? Do you feel the same way?
Well, yes, I definitely feel the same way, Mirna, about that. I'm trying to close up. My battery was getting low here. There we go. Yes, I feel the same way. I feel as though I have to touch and feel some part of poetry writing every single day, whether it's just reading a poem or editing one that I'm working on. I have to have that feel or touch every day. Even when I travel, I have to take my notebook, and I'm always thinking I'll find something along my travels that I want to write down a couple of lines here or there. So I keep it close to me all the time. And I want to share that David, I don't know if David's still with us at Belmont Library, but I have to give a shout out to David because I went and we have something in common, Robert and Mirna and myself. 5 years. It's like 5 years was the magic year that we decided we were going to turn it on. It was 5 years ago for me also. I happened to pop into the Belmont Library after doing a lot of research of where are poets on the peninsula. Am I going to have to drive to San Francisco to hang out with poetic people, or am I going to find them on the peninsula? So I just Googled it really quickly, and up came the Belmont Library Poetry Night. So from that point on, I headed out to the next week, I headed out to the library. However, it was the wrong week. It was not the week for poetry reading. But David, I don't know what he saw in me. He said, hey, Lois, don't leave. They're having a beautiful showing of a movie right down the hall. You will love it. It's a lot of poetic things happening in this movie. And he was absolutely right. It was the movie Rumble. So I always tell everyone I stumbled, into Rumble, and that's what got me into the Belmont Library. And the next week was poetry night. The next Tuesday was poetry night, and I was there, and I probably have only missed maybe 2 or maybe 3 nights not being there, because that's how much I just I found the group that I was looking for, and everyone was so warm and so welcoming. And at the time, Monica, it was the former poet laureate Jackie Rigoni was heading up everything, and she called on me. I'd never spoken in front of a group ever in my life before. I've been in corporate and managing and speaking and presenting, but never my poetry, never ever. She called on me, the first person, to get up and for open mic. And I was in shock. And I called her over and said, could you please maybe call on one more person before me so I see how this goes? I've never done this before. And I was hooked. So we could leave tonight, leaving the word addicted, hooked, all of those things work when it comes to poetry, writing, and certainly open mic. And you just feel like you just want to share, and you learn so much from everyone else, just listening to their rhythms and their rhymes, and all of their poetic craft comes out when you're sitting, and in person is beautiful, but we have managed to create such a wonderful, wonderful virtual environment. And I look forward to this environment every single month also.
That's fantastic. What a treat to hear how you got into it. And I totally understand the pull of open mics, being there myself. And I think also they are such a wonderful learning platform, aren't they? You get to hear such emerging as well as established poets in open mics. And I think it's wonderful to just self-mentor yourself while listening to these poets, and prepare yourself for the stage, off the page, I'd say. And that was going to be one of my questions, was going to be, how do you keep returning to making art and sustaining your practice, or given all the chaos and the challenging process of a book is, with the focus on production and revision and editing. But I see that all 3 of you have already responded, that you do keep returning to the art for what it is, and it just draws you in and keeps calling you in. So it is very natural to understand where you get that motivation from constantly. As parting words, however, I'd like to hear from your own experiences as a published poet. What's one advice for poets who may be on their own journey to a debut poetry collection?
Well, I can certainly just share one very quick thing about, I happen to self-publish with a dear friend of mine who did the cover for my book. The one thing that I would leave with anyone that's at this point of thinking about doing it and haven't decided if you're going to work with a publisher or self-publish. I wanted to self-publish because I wanted to just learn as much about it as I could. And this was a wonderful way to do it. What I would leave you with is, please, the first order out, only order a small amount, because no matter how much you think that you found every error, you have fixed everything you wanted to, trust me, you will always find 1 or 2 or 3 more little things that you would have done differently. And you get that opportunity, but don't say, I'm going to order 200 and I'm going to start handing them out and being at all of the affairs and the events. Just order a small amount that gives you the opportunity to then find any other errors or change your poem that you might want to before you print a big volume. So good information, take it from me.
I would just say, if you're really interested in publishing a book of your poetry, there's pros and cons to self-publishing and doing it through a publisher. I don't think there's one best way, whatever you feel good about. I will say that if you're going to do it through a publisher, don't get discouraged with rejections, and take the process with the same level of fun and creative challenge as you do the actual writing. Because to me, editing and revising, and if you have a good editor or publisher and you're working with that person, that's as challenging and creative and satisfying as the writing itself, or it certainly can be. So that's what I would say.
Mirna, what advice would you have?
Well, I'm not sure I'm qualified because I simply went immediately, took the route in self-publishing. So I don't know anything about the other experience. I've heard some people complaining, that they couldn't do in certain instances exactly how they wanted to do it. And a couple of them even said, I wish I self-published. Well, I wanted to spare myself that, and I felt that I'm constrained with time. If I were 50 years old, yes, I would probably go and try to get published instead of self-published like this. But I have to say, for me, the whole procedure of publishing does heavily take away from writing. It does, no matter how you turn it. It's exactly the time that goes into organizing how to publish it. Even supplying a title, even if you want to use some aphorisms as the title of your own or quoted, it doesn't matter. If you want to give more of a meaning to the book. See, because when I write poems as they come or as I want to write them. When I published this collection, I tried to do more and give a certain profile, a certain message, and a certain character to the entire collection, to a point where I was kicking out of the collection. I left out some poems that are just as dear to me and probably better than what is in it, because they didn't fit the character of the book. That is always a danger. So yeah, you can't have it both. You use your time as you best know how. But I have to say this. I'm at this point starting the second collection. I'm pretty ready with the manuscript to go. So the organizing of the second book, including the chaptering, I don't know if there is such a word at all, but to make chapters, to have some quotes ready for chapters, to have this book flow as a complete piece rather than just random collection of poems. First time, this took quite an effort. Second time, it's a route that I know already. We need to have a theme, we need to work them out, we need to organize the stuff into separate parts of the book, and here we go. So, it depends entirely on one person, on the poet, how much energy they have and how much of that energy they want to take away from writing.
Right. Well, I think that all three of you, the advice that you've given and the tips you have shared from your own process, they are so meaningful and so important for all those who might be thinking of going on this route. And I want to thank all three of you, Mirna, Robert, and Lois. This was a proper poetry party, and I could speak for hours with each of you. And in fact, we are a little over time today, but I'll just say that the pleasure and dedication with which each of you write comes through in your readings. All of us have felt it. And your journey as poets is very inspiring. So thank you so much again for honoring the arts, for showing us how it's done without ever saying anything, but just by doing what you love with all heart and humility, and for being here tonight. I've heard you three for long, and it was my honor and an absolute pleasure to host you.
Thank you so much, Monica.
Thank you, Monica, indeed. You're
Thank you.
a wonderful hostess all along, really.
Yes.
Amazing.
Well, please look in the chat for links to our trio's individual poetry books. Please save the info. And thank you for sharing your thoughts and comments in the chat as well. The chat is brimming with so much love. If you are not able to save it, I will send you a copy, Robert, Mirna, and Lois. And I'll invite you at the end of our open mic segment, if we have time, for a closing poem from each of you. But with that, we are going to stop recording this segment. Those of you who are in the Zoom room, please stay online for the open mic segment of the evening. To the YouTube audience, thanks for joining in, and hope to see you for next month's virtual Belmont Poetry Night. Thank you.